for joining us. My name is Gavin Cooney. I'm the founder and CEO of Learnosity. This is my, 15th ASU+GSV or something like that. It certainly seems so. Joining us today is Thais from Penn Foster, one of our flagship customers when it comes to Feedback Aide. I want to bring you through the kind of case study of how we're using AI to score student work and what that means to that organization. So we're going to bring you through some of that stuff. So generally what we realized that we could use a general purpose model, we could use a large language model to score at a large scale, score essays and open-ended responses. We want to bring you through a few kind of real-world examples here, the first one being Penn Foster, and show you how it works, and we'll give you a bit of a demo depending on how much time we have left at the end, because I tend to go on a bit. So hopefully we won't go on too long. Basically, you need actionable feedback. Anything you want to measure, anything you want to improve, you measure first, okay? So if you want to be a better golfer, you count the number of strokes it takes to go around a course. That's what you do. And some of the stuff doesn't scale. It's not really fair to have teachers assign like the best possible assessment all the time, because they're going to spend hours and hours and hours trying to grade all this stuff. And we all know teachers. We all know how hard that is. We all know. We all know how much time they spend in their free time trying to grade these assessments. So what we're trying to do here is to enable some of those things, enable more authentic assessment using AI here. So you got these overworked teachers, you got a bunch of burnout. I think we all have friends who are teachers who are kind of the unsung heroes in society. They're kind of underpaid and overworked, and we want to make it a lot easier for those guys. So why use LLMs? We have, Learnosity has about 400 million items in their item bank. So about, what's your estimate? 20% of those are kind of open-ended responses, text responses. So in no world were we going to go out and build 80 million individual models for individual questions. That's just not possible to do. So you can use a generally pre-trained model. You can use an LLM. It's massively scalable, and it works with that kind of level of content that we're dealing with. It's super efficient, and we can talk about how kind of cheap it is. So before, what you would have to do something like this is you'd have to get maybe 1,000 perfectly graded responses. You'd have to build a model with that, and then the 1,001st response was going to be able to be auto-graded. That's just not possible to do at scale, and certainly not at the scale we're operating at. And it's kind of very difficult to do in a formative scenario as well. So what we can now do is really super accurate scoring and feedback, much more feedback than any student would have got before, and to do that kind of at scale without having to have 1,000 responses in there or 1,000 examples of feedback. What you really need is the student response and a reasonably well-written rubric. I'll bring you through some examples of that. And we call this thing Feedback Aide because we were talking about the feedback it would bring. And I always thought, like, I do my homework and I get a week later I get a 7 out of 10. It's not that actionable. It's not really something I can work with. But here you're getting much more instant feedback and much more actionable feedback. But we call it Feedback Aide because we figured it was for homework. We figured it was for formative assessment. And it's astonishingly good. So much so that it's now been used in kind of large scale, high stakes exams because it's better than human graders. It's more accurate, it's more consistent, it gives justifications of grades, and it's just better than a tired kind of overworked grader doing stuff in the background. Nobody's suggesting, and there's a whole section on this later on, nobody's suggesting we just replace all high stakes graders with AI. The idea is here you're augmenting the human process here with AI in the high stakes space. But because it's so good, that's why we're doing the high stakes, large scale stuff. So before it would have cost a few bucks an essay. You're pre-training all these things. Obviously there's some scale there, but it's like $1 or more an essay. We can do this for 1 cent per essay. That's way better than we thought it would be at the beginning. But 1 cent an essay is amazing. Like 1 million essays cost 10 grand. Like that's amazing. And what you're doing is it's at a price point that will enable teachers to use it and will enable it for kind of day-to-day, everyday, low-stakes homework type assessments. We've been partnered with the University of Oxford. You might have heard of them. And what we've done there is we have a bunch of essays there that we have graded already. And then what we'll do is when we improve the model, we kind of run through those 17,000 essays and see how it fares against the new whatever tweak we made that week, and we're able to consistently kind of just improve the scores. So a little bit of science behind this is a thing called a quadratic weighted kappa. That's the math term for how you look at how well things align. Okay, so if you and I were both hired to grade some high stakes exam or whatever, what they do is they would give us 100 different grades. We'll see how we align to the kind of perfect grade. And if I get a 0.8 or above, it's excellent, it's amazing. And it's never going to be exactly the same because two humans are always different. If I get a 0.6 and above, I'm keeping my job. It's an average grader. We're all good. If I get a 0.4, it's okay. It's a moderate agreement. But they might kind of retrain me or pull me out and give me some stuff. Below that, you've got a problem. What we're finding here, and here's the kind of this confusion matrix. The idea is that you look here, and you should see a really nice linear match between what a human scores and what an AI scores. And then you'll see some exceptions. As you work through these data sets, what you find here is like, oh, the human gave it a 27 and the AI gave it a 16. Why is that? And that kind of exception there, sometimes it means the rubric wasn't correct, and sometimes it means the human got it wrong. And the human gets it wrong quite a bit, actually. And you can imagine you're a tired grader or teacher, and you're working through these things, you can get these wrong pretty frequently. And sometimes you find like a student has written drivel. They've written stuff that looks like real language. You know on an iPhone you can click the next predicted word. Like you kind of do that and you still get graded for it. Or you maybe write something that's maybe very good, but it's got completely off topic. Humans often will miss these things, and they skim down through the answers. They're looking for well-structured sentences and so on, and they'll miss these things. The AI doesn't miss these things. And what we're finding basically is if you have a decent rubric that was written, it'll be better than a human really, really consistently. And sometimes we find that the rubric, as it's written, doesn't include all the information. So we went to some of the high stakes, large scale summative readings, like these big convention centers, and you have hundreds of teachers in there, like the ones we're talking about. And what we find is we kind of go, oh, why wasn't this a 5? I thought this would be a 5, and the reader gave it a 3 or whatever that is. And often it's not something that was written in the rubric. It was kind of additional context that was taught to the grader, to the reader in the classroom the day before. As they were trained, they're like, oh, by the way, look out for this one thing. And if they don't give 3 examples, you can't give them a 5. Or if they, one of those kind of nuanced things. Sometimes we're seeing rubrics as well that like would have a definition for a score 1, 3, 5, and 7, and it's skipping the even numbers. And it's just like they're told, look, a 4 is like better than a 3 and worse than a 5. That's not good enough. What you need to do here is you need to write a reasonable amount of detail in these rubrics. So when the AI has the context, it'll do an exceptional job. So what we found here is we're getting up to a 0.91 of a quadratic weighted kappa. On an average, we're getting 0.84 at the moment, which again is, that's excellent alignment. If I'm hired to grade these things and I'm getting a 0.84, like there's no extra training needed, we're delighted with that grading. And that's improving over time. So what's happening there? There's 2 things, is the LLMs are getting more powerful. We would have started this a number of years ago. The names of the LLMs, like you start with the earlier ones, and they become better and better, and again, cheaper and cheaper, I guess, over time. Second thing is our techniques on top of that have improved massively. We've learned what these exceptions are, we've learned what the edge cases are, and we've learned to kind of make those confusion graphs kind of narrow more and more and more, just by more and more techniques. We also found that with the short answer questions, that we have like 96% accuracy on those as well, and that's improving too. So we think this saves teachers about 5 hours a week, and we're going to show you some examples of that. It's massively cost effective, it's human level accuracy, and ultimately what we're here to do, my mission in life and why I'm doing this and not something else, is because I wanted to improve education. And this is a massive improvement. This is much better feedback in the hands of students in a really timely way so they can learn more really actionable things. So what we're going to do is, Thais is going to come in and talk about the real world example in Penn Foster, and then I'll take it over from there.
Thank you. I know it's for Gavin, not for me. So let me tell you a little bit about Penn Foster Group. Penn Foster Group is a very large online asynchronous school. We have high school for adult learner and teenagers, compulsory learning age, and we have college and career. That use case we are going to go through is particular to high school at the moment. Penn Foster originally started like 136 years ago as a correspondence school. And at some point in time, for coal miners in Pennsylvania, at some point in time, someone said, let's go digital, and let's put PDFs and multiple choices online, and that's the school. So the past few years, we've been working really hard to redesign that learning experience and bring modern pedagogy into it, more authentic assessment, and real life experience for the learners. And one of the things that we found, of course, if any one of you are teachers, you know that writing is hard. And so for our high schoolers, they're getting stuck in our English courses. I have 4 English courses, and they're getting stuck in the English courses that they had to write essays to finish. And there was a large number. We graduate last year, we graduated at 56,000 high schoolers. So everything we do is a very large scale. And we found out that we had around 30,000 learners that are getting stuck between the beginning of their engagement with one of our English courses to the end of the 4th one. The team went and did the work and figured out that a big part of it, was due to how we structured the grading and the feedback. All humans grading and giving feedback, it would take our learners sometimes weeks to get to the point where they had an essay that was ready to be submitted. And within that time frame, we would lose them. They would not come back to finish the course. And the time was due to, you write an essay, you submit to the grader, the human grader has a limited capacity, of course. At some point looks at your essay, has some feedback for you, sends back to you, then you log in, see that there's feedback, act on it, sometimes you don't understand it, send back the question to the grader. And this back and forth sometimes will take weeks. We found out that we are giving inconsistent feedback from a quality perspective to the learners. Sometimes the learners didn't even understand the feedback, so they couldn't act on it. The learner didn't have a good understanding of when they're going to receive the feedback, so they're not ready for it. All of this together was causing this massive attrition point for the high schoolers. I'm a big fan of Learnosity. Worked with you guys for a while, few years. And so one of the things was, let's bring in, and I knew Learnosity was starting to experiment with AI. And the team, that's actually here in the room, I'm not going to point to them, had started thinking about it. And so we brought it all together. At the time, Learnosity was working on the Feedback Aide for writing, but from a grader's perspective, right? The grader would have a rubric that they would grade the essay against it, and the grader would accept or edit or decline the help from AI. And we worked with Learnosity to create an actual learner interface for that same technology. So at the same time, we were improving the learner experience and the feedback quality and instant feedback. And on the other side, we were improving the efficiency of our graders that would get that feedback graded against the the rubric we had. That's what we went through. Another thing that we have is that part of our mission is to be the most affordable online asynchronous school that we can possibly be. And of course, as Gavin was talking about costs, AI was always this like, can we even afford to do that and not pass that cost to our learners? One of the things that Gavin touched on was the rubric. We had to completely rethink how we wrote the rubric because our rubrics were written for, I'm supposed to be here, sorry. Our rubrics were written for human graders, right? So subjective to interpretation and some nuances, and we had to work on that rubric to be very clear so the AI could help us with that. So the experience goes through like this. You get to the part of the course you have to write your essay. You were told that there is an AI feedback aide that's going to work with you. It gives you immediate feedback as you're writing and gives you a projected grade. And you decide that you're going to submit to the human grader with that grade, or you're going to keep working on it until you're ready to move forward. So since we launched that pilot in Q3 last year. It's not a pilot anymore, it's implemented at scale by now, but at the time, it was just a pilot. And so since then, we have over 50,000 essays that have been submitted through that experience. About 50% of the learners uploaded more than one. And what that tells us is that they are iterating on those essays. We do have a data point that shows us that 24,000 plus learners submitted a better essay after going through the Feedback Aide and acting on it. The course completion improved from 7% to 18% after we released that technology. And the most important thing for us is that it really reduced around 25% of the attrition on the 90 days course completion. Those numbers are very meaningful for us because when you think about our scale, we're talking about thousands and thousands of learners. They are now actually acting on their essay, having immediate and high-quality feedback, and moving forward. They can't, of course, graduate without it. And another thing that we learned is that behavior of our high schoolers is that they can go, sometimes, they hate I wouldn't say they hate. They avoid the writing so much that sometimes they go all the way to the end of the program without writing the essay, and then they come back to finish the essay. So it is a very big attrition point for graduation for our learners, that particular experience. And that has improved drastically with the technology in place. The return rates dropped from 44% to just 7%. What that means is that one of the problems we had with the human capacity and bandwidth on our side is that they had to go back and forth so many times that they didn't have time to serve the learners as fast as they could, or they should. So the back and forth was reduced from 44% to 7%. That is, again, huge, opening up time for our graders to actually work on that. They should be on the teaching, on the tutoring if they need to, or answering academic questions instead of just going back and forth with the grading. Most of our learners, 57% at that time, this was last year when we did the survey, think it's great, or how do we frame extremely helpful, somewhat helpful to have the Feedback Aide in place. One thing that is not here, but is very interesting to think about if you're ever thinking about implementing something like this, is that our customer service, right? So our phones, people that are calling us or through emails, through chat, coming to us with questions. When the beginning of this, when we decided to implement this, a lot of the complaints were around, where is my feedback? It's taking too long. I don't understand what they're telling me. And it shifted to, the AI is not letting me submit because it says my essay is not good enough. So it's been an interesting shift on the conversation on the phone, which is that we had to train our customer service to really coach the learners through this journey instead of like creating tickets for our graders. They're not grading it fast enough or not giving good feedback. And that's it for our case study. Now you do that.
I do that. So like that's 7,000 students who are going to get their high school equivalent this year that they wouldn't have got otherwise. It's one of the things I'm most proud of in my entire career. That's incredible. Like I'm here, I'm trying to make an impact. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. It was the mission of the company to kind of, I have a certain set of skills like Liam Neeson in that movie. And I wanted to use my technology skills to kind of, to try to innovate in the education industry because I believe, I think we all believe in education. I think nearly everybody I meet has that same kind of mission-driven thing. They're a struggling teacher who ended up becoming a product person in a publisher or something because they believed in this. They wanted to move things forward. Nearly everyone I ever meet is doing that, but this is one of the biggest impacts we've seen, that we can actually measure what we're doing directly to people, sometimes the most disadvantaged in society, getting their high school equivalent. It's just like, it makes me, I'm so delighted with that. So let me show you a bit more around summative assessment. And I'll skim through some of this and I can give you some of the live demos. We can talk, we have some time for a Q&A as well. So I kind of intimated this before. There's kind of, you just think, oh, we'll just use AI, it kind of replaces human or something. It's not. In the kind of high stakes scenario, and again with formative, you're looking at a spectrum of completely doing human scoring, right to completely doing AI scoring, and kind of everything in between. And I want to bring you through some of these options here. So first thing is you have human scoring, we know about that. We've got AI back reading. What that means is you're doing kind of a large scale exam or whatever. You have AI score it, you don't show that score to the humans, and then you identify the graders who are going off topic or who aren't aligned with what we presume is a pretty good grade with AI. Because what would happen before in these large-scale exams is you have them graded once and then maybe you backread 10% or 15% or something like that. So now you can target how you backread. And the aim here is to make it a more accurate result. Then you can do guided scoring. So we'll come back to that. So firstly, full auto scoring, human backreading. So when you're doing full auto, sorry, I'm starting on the other end. When you do full auto scoring, you definitely want to do, for high stakes, you definitely want to have humans graded 10% and just make sure that it's consistently aligned, okay? And that reduces your costs and your time by about 90%. Next thing then is exception-based scoring. What we mean by that is sometimes you answer a question, what's the capital of Ireland? And there's a certain number of answers and a certain number of misspellings you're happy to take, and certain answers we know are wrong, okay? But then there's other ones. There's probably different examples. So this is here is like, give me examples of why the British and the Americans fell out in 17 whatever, right? And there's certain reasons here, and there's acceptable reasons. There's ones that we know are wrong, and then there's kind of the ground in between. So what you do there is you have the AI go through and grade the ones it knows are definitely right, and the ones it knows are definitely wrong, and identify where there's a kind of a middle ground where we have a human grade that. And again, you can reduce your scoring time here and your sorting cost by about 70% by using this method. Guided scoring, I'm going to show you some of this in a minute, but sometimes you have these long, complex submissions, and maybe there's in the rubric and in the student's response, it's supposed to be like a thesis, an argument, a counter-argument, evidence. And you want the human reader to be able to see that and identify that. So what you do is you use AI to highlight the thesis in red and the argument in green and the counter-argument in orange, and they can eyeball that really, really quickly, and they can grade that. We also can provide them with predictive scores. Say, we think this is a level 5. We think this is a grade B, whatever that is. And here's the justification. Here is why we think that is. And then the human can read it and can override that grade when needed. So here's so there's the predictive score. We just showed them here. You have to show them the justification of grade. I'll probably show you some of this in the demos. But you predict the grade and you let them override it where necessary. So you have that kind of human in the loop. And then you have the annotation of response. So this is the example here. there's a thesis statement. It's in yellow. You kind of mouse over it. There's a little annotation in there, AI generated, to tell you what that is. And I can go and I can eyeball that and say, okay, they've got the thesis, they've got the argument, they've got the counter argument, they have the evidence, and I'm much better able to apply that. We sometimes find as well with grading is that, let's just say there was a rubric that had, is there a thesis, is there an argument, is there a counter argument, is there evidence, that the grader will kind of say, oh, we think that's a 3 out of 5, and they'll just put 3 down the middle, as opposed to actually giving the right feedback. It's a 4 here, it's a 2 here, and where they let down. But here it makes it a lot easier. Another example we found was there was sources within the materials, and students sometimes weren't using a proper bibliography. They weren't referencing it properly, and then they weren't putting it in the bibliography. So here we have the ability to kind of mouse over something, every source, and see, was this cited properly? Was this in the bibliography? Otherwise, you've got a 20-page thing, and you're like, oh, they mentioned this thing, okay, back to the bibliography, is it there? Okay, it is, back and forth, and you're scrolling up and down, or you're using paper over and back. The AI can do this. So this is kind of the tools you put in place to help. So my point broadly here, and we'll get onto demo in a second, is that when you're looking at an exam or you're looking at a series of exams, it isn't just one answer. It isn't just like, oh, we'll auto score it. You use different approaches in different ways. So here's a real life example where we kind of worked out, we knew that certain questions took 10 minutes or 20 minutes to grade, certain questions took 1 minute to grade. Then you let's say, oh, there was this number of thousands of responses. How many person weeks is it going to take to grade those? Including the double grading and the back reading and everything else. And we kind of graph this out. And we can identify different types of questions and where it's appropriate to use guided scoring, where it's appropriate to use complete full auto scoring, and where it is appropriate more to use the exception-based stuff. And you can see a real life example here. So I'm going to skim through this very quickly, but there's an English language exam, and we found 4 different traits. And here are the kind of confusion matrices where you can see where the predicted AI score was versus a human score.
What do you mean by trait?
Oh, in the rubric, there's generally 4. There was 4 traits. So line by line, we're looking at those things. And that's overall what that would look like when you add those 4 things together. But what we can do there is we can predict when it's right. So when you're doing kind of higher stake stuff, not just the formative stuff where you're doing a kind of a send to go, you can kind of throw the kitchen sink at it. And what I mean by that is you can have the AI grade it multiple times. You can have multiple LLMs go grade it. You can have the AI grade each trait, each level of the rubric multiple times. And you can see where the LLMs agree with themselves. And then you can work out a confidence score of how confident I am with the grade that I'm putting on the screen. In this case here, we realized that we were really confident about 300, and we were not so confident on 70. And then there was different agreements between those. But with the 300 we were really confident about, we got about a 0.9 on the quick score, which is phenomenal. Right? The other one is 0.85, which is also phenomenal, but it's slightly less phenomenal. But the point is that the confidence score can be determined there, and again, you can decide where you need the human to go in and look. So I'm going to show you a couple of demos here. First one here is just a standard demo. You got your essay here on the left-hand side, and you have your rubric. You can show it to you grading live, but it goes off. And it goes through, this is a rubric that has like a 5 by 5, and it goes off and it reviews each criteria, each trait, and it provides a grade. So the AI is all happening there, and I'm reading this and I'm going, you know what, I think that was only a satisfactory instead of a good. I'm going to override that. I probably agree with that one, so overriding those things. And then I have the feedback to the learner here. This isn't, you got 7 out of 10. This is really actionable, great feedback to the learner, line by line, that they can go and they can action. Of course, that can be that can be tweaked to whatever language and whatever level you need. Here's another example here where you've got a rubric. This one happens to be a 3 by a 4, but you have additional grading guidance. So this is the idea here that this is the stuff that would have been taught in the room as the graders were taught what to do. This additional context, because it's not like it's a grade C, you'll know when you see it. That's not good enough. You provide the additional context in here. So this was like introductory and concluding paragraphs are not required. Direct quotations are not required. Do not deduct points for grammar and spelling. So if it's a history essay, do you want to deduct points for grammar and spelling? That's the additional context that you give the rubric. Here's an example where you have a question and you have a source. So sometimes, I don't know, you've got a question on Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 1 or whatever, and you just include the whole thing in there as a source that you can kind of refer back to. In this case here, you have a comprehension thing, and you have instead of having a rubric like this, where you have a kind of 3 by 4 or 5 by 5, you have this holistic rubric here. This was a 1 out of 4. And there you have the feedback to the learner. Now we get into the short answer questions. So initially you kind of think of long essay questions, but what we're doing is we're opening up a whole load of questions that you couldn't have asked before in math and in other subjects. So this one here is, what was the Titanic sinking in 1912 that made it one of the most famous ships in history? So the rubric gives you the correct response. It gives you alternate responses that could also be accepted, and it gives you incorrect or insufficient responses. Okay? So we can grade that properly now, and you can just kind of rip through that using AI and not have to read every single one. Here's an example where it's a math question. You need to get 3 key points. And if you miss a point, if you use the incorrect formula but you do the calculations correct, you still get some points here. There's 3 key points here, getting right or wrong. There's the text, but there's the image. So what we're doing here is we're now accepting either text or handwriting. So you kind of submit, this is of an API that's available to people to build products on top of, okay? So you can then submit images of the student work. It uses OCR to go off and work out what the student was kind of writing, and then can grade on top of that. And you've kind of seen 2 examples there. You've seen the OCR, and you also see the different question type. Here is what I mentioned before around the annotations. So there's the student response. There happens to be a kind of a works cited, a kind of bibliography there, and you have the student response. Now, here are the AI-generated annotations for this. In this case, we wanted a thesis. There was a thesis in green. We wanted evidence, and we wanted citations. And we annotate those things in there. And of course, as a grader, I can skim through, and I can either take the suggested grade, or we can not present it to them, and it makes the grading a lot easier. There's the feedback, of course, to the learner. It's available in 50 languages or something. So both the input and the feedback can be in any language. In this case, we're using French on the student response and in the feedback and on the grade. But you can do other stuff. So you say, let's just say you wanted a Spanish native language student who is writing English. You can take their input in English, and you can give them their feedback in Spanish, and any combination of those things. But you can also detect when the language is wrong. They can't just write it in French instead, or write it in English instead. And last thing I'll show you, and I'll open up to questions, is really important thing here. We're scanning all of these things for any indications of self-harm, any foul language, sexual references, this kind of stuff, within context, right? So if you're writing an essay on the death of Kurt Cobain, it might be fine to write something about suicide. If you're writing an essay about something else, and they mention some sort of self-harm or some suicidal ideation or whatever that is, you really want to be flagging that really, really quickly. And the last thing you want to do is miss it. So what we do is we show it up here, big red warning box, and we check for a bunch of these things. The grader or the teacher has to acknowledge that. It was gradable, we graded it, but it's there. Now, honestly, would you miss the kind of terrible thing that's written in that? You absolutely would when you're running through hundreds of essays and you're trying to get through homework and somebody's written in here some terrible thing. You'd miss that. The AI is here to flag those things, which is obviously super, super important. So I know we're kind of racing through some of those things, but I'll take some questions. Oh, thanks.
On the teacher-facing side, are you able to put in some elements about your users, such as my student has dyslexia, account for that?
Yeah. So what you're doing, remember this is a tool that you're building a product with, not necessarily an end product. Yes, you can. So you can put in the extra, remember the additional feedback, the additional context piece? So you could absolutely do that. You're passing through a rubric. It doesn't have to be the same rubric for you and I. So it says, okay, I've got dyslexia, and I'll show it in the end. Don't grade him, it's a history exam, don't grade him on his spelling or that kind of stuff. You can pass through that stuff as context in there.
What if students write using AI to write and load it in?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I was asked this question at a conference a couple of years ago, and I gave my honest answer, and I got some very bad feedback from people who run businesses that are checking for this stuff. I think that you can't use AI to detect cheating or check use of LLMs, and then like throw somebody out of college or something because they got it, because there is false positives within that. It's not reliable enough. That said, we've all got an email or been submitted a document or whatever where you're like, this was written with AI. So you can detect the blatant things. It's something we're going to add in to detect the absolute blatant things. But there's a big asterisk with that. You cannot throw somebody out of college or whatever, or out of school because it says that. It's just like, here's a little indication that maybe it was blatantly LLMs. Because what happens then is, it just becomes this game of whack-a-mole, that there's a different LLM, there's a different prompting technique. Somebody on Reddit puts up a thing about how to get around the thing, and you just get all you're rewarding there is somebody who's just kind of better at using LLMs. Now, I will say that it kind of challenges us to think about assessment a lot more. I've been writing 10-page specs on stuff using AI. Are they any less valuable because I've written them with AI? Probably not. I've got 120 developers working for me who use AI. If I'm interviewing somebody and I don't let them use AI, that's kind of silly, right? I want them to use AI when they're coding, right? And the analogy I gave, we were talking about this before, is that I'd love to see the Olympics where everyone's on drugs. And what I mean by that, or the Tour de France, right? It's not just one dude who's on drugs and he's winning and everyone else is like going the hard way. A bit like that with student submissions and student essays. Wouldn't it be interesting to let them use AI? What can they do with the best tools available with them? It's the same as having a math student use a calculator in a math exam. Does it really help? Sure, in the basic arithmetic, but we both know there's a lot more to math than just using the calculator. So I do think we're going to have to rethink assessment a lot, and in some cases explicitly let people use AI, know they're doing that, and ask them to submit their best work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Claude, Chat, they're not the best at solving math equations. How have you kind of resolved those kind of issues? What are you using?
I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you.
That's a decent part of it.
The product manager for this is a math PhD and has been doing this stuff, and it's pretty excellent at this stuff. So yeah, it's pretty good.
What is the educator input to generate the rubrics? What is required?
So nearly all the rubrics came from the kind of pre-existing, the kind of pre-AI world, right? So think about the high-stakes exams. They were the rubrics that already existed, and you're then using them with AI. And likewise, in the formative scenario, it's kind of generally pre-existing rubrics, because obviously there's not that much content has been written in the last whatever number of months and whatever this has been available. What we are doing then is we're trying to educate our customers about how to write better rubrics for this purpose. Remember, the old rubric was written for a human, and this rubric is written for AI. So we're using, we can use AI to do that too, right? And we can also do things like, we have a process that will go through all multiple choice questions and convert them into short answer AI scored questions. I've been on a 20-year crusade to kill the multiple choice question, and I'm nearly there. But that's what you're doing. You're using AI to do that. But no, we haven't really been able to get, there's not enough content of late that has had that input. But you realize when you get it wrong, why, and you're kind of analyzing, adding additional context. Make sense?
So you talk a lot about the rubrics and the sources and all that. Does the prompt or the question play into it at all as well, or is that immaterial?
Say it again. Does the prompt?
So like if it's like an essay question,
Mm-hmm.
like what were the important parts of the Declaration of Independence? Is the evaluation that the AI does, is it also based on the question itself, or is it just purely?
Oh no, it's very much based on the question itself, and sometimes it's a generic rubric and 100 different questions, right? So it's very much based on the question, and it'll pull in its own knowledge. Sometimes the Declaration of Independence, it'll pull in its own knowledge about that, and sometimes we'll use our internal stuff where we'll let's just say you have a whole chapter on the Declaration of Independence in the way we teach it here at whatever publisher, and you can pull that in as well and let it use that as context while it answers, evaluates your knowledge of this particular chapter. Make sense? Any other questions?
Can you share
Sure.
the deck?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll do it afterwards. I think we got everybody's name in the way, and we sent something out.
Awesome.
Great.
Yeah.
Are you hosting your own models, or is it, I assume you have interoperability to develop this?
Yeah, we're using some of the publicly available LLMs, and then a bunch of stuff like I just mentioned there, where you're using the content from the publisher and stuff with those. And the reason to do that is just we can move so much faster. Look at that graph of how much it's improved over 18-month period or so. If we were hosting our own model, you'd still be working on hosting the one from 18 months ago and so on. But what we do there is we use the enterprise versions of those things. It's unacceptable to be training a model with any kind of student data or even publisher content. So you use the kind of enterprise version. We have the contract that says we're not going to train the model on that. And then you're using the next greatest one. Sometimes you're using different ones for different things. So the self-harm check thing might be a small model and something else. We're doing this kind of agentic stuff where we find the different models that are more, and there's a kind of a cost effectiveness kind of equation as well. And in some cases, you're using 3 different LLMs for the same essay. One is doing the annotation, one is doing the kind of self-harm or inappropriate content check, the other one is doing the grade, etc. But you're using all the kind of publicly available ones. Any other questions? Look, delighted to chat to you afterwards, but thanks very much for coming, I appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you.